Welcome to The Key, where we discuss ways to unlock efficiencies for your teams on the road. My name is Lee Adam. I'm a mobility consultant and vehicle program expert here at Cardata. This is a podcast that dives into the strategy behind company mobility benefits programs. This is the ultimate podcast for cross-functional thought leaders working to optimize efficiencies and ensure a modern approach to field team enablement. Keep people happy, streamline costs, and spearhead company growth. That's the key. Let's buckle in. Today, we're asking the question, what are the new economics of fleet? And how can companies create smarter, more flexible mobility programs that truly work for their people and their bottom line? We've got a special guest today, Cardata's brand new Director of Partnerships, Alan Wisniewski. If you look at his background, he's pretty much done it all. OEM engineering at Ford, strategy consulting, leadership roles at mobility startups, and most recently serving as the COO of Biz Fleets. He's scaled teams, built partnerships, and helped companies unlock major cost savings through smarter fleet and mobility strategies. Now, he's Cardata's new Director of Partnerships, bringing a rare full-stack perspective to how modern mobility programs should work. Alan, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Lee. Very excited to be here today.
Awesome. So let's get right into it, Alan. Now, you've worked across OEMs, consulting, mobility startups, and fleet ops. What unique perspectives does that give you on the industry today?
So I think I've been fortunate enough to see a lot of the different sides of the landscape. And so starting at Ford in the manufacturing world, was hands-on the plant floor, designing jobs for folks on the assembly line, which was really cool to see how vehicles are built. And then my passion for strategy and kind of curiosity always led me into the vehicle planning and strategy side, where I got to see what it takes to build and design a vehicle program 5 and 6 years before anything even hits the road. So that was a great experience to start my career. Got my MBA from the University of Michigan and jumped into strategy consulting. And so right there, I got to learn how do C-level executives and business unit VPs think about growth and strategy, which was a really great experience. And then for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been in the fleet world, kind of taking ideas, turning them into businesses, and I've learned a lot about the landscape there. So I think I've got a good understanding of some of the larger players and where some of the spaces to innovate are within the fleet space.
Yeah, it's so interesting to meet somebody who has such a unique background where you've done everything between seeing how cars are made to actually designing the financial strategies around vehicle programs. It's a very rare resume. So we're really excited to have you here.
It's been a fun journey so far, and I'm excited to continue on.
Awesome. I'm curious, what initially drew you to the fleet and mobility space?
So I was recruited to join a company called Finn. Finn was a German car subscription company that was entering the U.S. market. And so I really just loved the idea behind the company. You can think of Finn as a short-term lease of a new vehicle. You can order the car online. It's bundled together with insurance. They deliver the car to your house in like 5 to 7 days. So I thought as a consumer, I would love the chance to get into a new car every 6 or 12 months. And so I wanted to be part of the solution. So I think I was the fourth person on the US team. There were about 200 folks in Germany, and really evolved into a very cool role where I got to build partnerships with manufacturers, order thousands of vehicles from leading OEMs like General Motors and Tesla, Toyota and Mercedes. So really just fell in love with the people in the fleet world and have been lucky enough to be in the fleet space ever since.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And now you're in reimbursement, which is certainly the fleet space, but quite different, right? So now that you've joined Cardata, what excites you most about that pivot into the world of reimbursement?
Yeah. I think first of all, I'm most excited about the people at Cardata. I think the team here is exceptional. So it's been a really welcoming first month or so on the team. But as it relates to reimbursement specifically, I'm really excited about continuing to introduce reimbursement into the fleet operators playbook. For so long in the industry, primary levers to optimization have really included things like shifting from ownership to leasing to be more capitally efficient, introducing a higher mix of EVs and hybrids to improve your fuel efficiency, mitigating risk and lowering accident costs by doing telematics. So I think with reimbursement, there's a real opportunity to bring significant cost savings and risk reduction to the fleet world in the right application. So together with our team, finding those vehicle use cases and implementing the programs that will help our teams and their teams achieve financial safety and compliance goals will be a really exciting initiative for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's just such a new and growing lever, right? For fleet managers to start to pull, and it historically hasn't really been seen as part of that playbook or book of strategies that they can leverage. But I think as we see the growth of reimbursement and the evolution of tax regulations, we're able to find additional benefits when it actually makes sense for people to use personal cars. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, I think it makes sense with your fleet background to bring your really interesting perspectives to this space.
Absolutely. It's a new way to achieve objectives, right? A lot of times there's so much pressure that fleet managers face and organizations face when operating a fleet that this is really a breath of fresh air and a way to keep employees happy.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. Now, I kind of want to talk about flexibility and the growth of flexibility. We've seen that growth significantly in the past couple of years, post the COVID era. People wanting to have more time at home, wanting to have more PTO, wanting to have flexibility in their work and their mobility and their expectations. What do you think is driving the shift towards more flexible mobility strategies right now?
I think that there's been so much cost pressure on the automotive industry recently that they just need to explore new innovative solutions. Like I've got a lot of friends that work at Ford and GM and other places. They've taken a lot of pricing actions over the course of the last 5 years where vehicles are significantly more expensive for a variety of reasons, supply chain, manufacturing costs, et cetera. But that's one potential or one area where I think folks are realizing there's a real need to make things more flexible.
Mhm.
Insurance costs continue to rise, maintenance costs continue to rise. That's also supply chain and labor shortages. So all of these things really combine to make the cost of operating a fleet much more expensive now. For example, I worked with a customer a couple of years ago. They held onto a vehicle for 5 years and they were able to sell it for about 80% of the original MSRP because the cost to replace that vehicle, the MSRP on that vehicle to buy a new one was about double what it was 5 or 6 years ago when they bought it. So with all that cost pressure, I think fleets are typically managed on a pretty tight budget and need to consider, do I really need to own or lease this asset to achieve the objectives of the job?
Yeah, that's such a good point, right? Because thinking about, do I need to own or lease in order to accomplish the thing that that person is hired to do is such an important question to ask. Obviously there are benefits to maintaining, uniformed light duty, medium duty fleets, but do
Sure.
those benefits actually outweigh the cost pressures, the procurement challenges that companies are facing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's so many challenges. And I think one of the things that we do really well is really understanding that use case and getting to know the fleets and the drivers to make sure that we've got a program in place that works for everybody.
Yeah. And we kind of talked a little bit about, insurance costs rising, procurement challenges. Is there anything else you want to share about, why one size fits all vehicle programs are becoming harder for companies to sustain?
Yeah. So when I think of like the one size fits all, it goes both ways, right? It's not like if we were to say your entire company should be on a reimbursement model, that's not going to work for people that are driving snowplows, dump trucks, box trucks, things like that. But then for the fleet option, that's also not the most efficient method for a lot of organizations, right? We find use cases all the time where you could be overspending by 30 or 50% annually for even just a portion of your fleet. And
Mhm.
this results in millions of dollars of annual spend that could be potentially wasteful. So I think mobility programs really need to be focused on what the core requirements of that job are, and then striking the right balance of having a fleet program and some reimbursement assets in there as well.
Yeah, totally. We completely agree too. And I think it's really important to look at your mix and ask yourself what actually makes sense. And there's a big inclination to want to have a one size fits all. Hey, we are doing a car allowance for everybody. Hey, we're giving everybody a company car. But that solution is not only unfair for employees, but it's often just doesn't make sense, right? And with additional pressure, the desire and the requirement, Ethan, to have a policy that is actually flexible with business needs and requirements is becoming integral for businesses.
Absolutely. Right. And these programs change too, right? People move to different locations, territories change, right? So kind of, staying on top of that and having a constantly evolving program that will continue to meet your needs is something that I think we do really well.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. The other element too is like, we've met companies before who've had the same fleet policy or the same vehicle policy, same reimbursement policy for 10 plus years, right?
Sure.
And it's so easy to say, well, it's not broken. We don't necessarily know it's broken, so we don't want to fix it. But fleet can't operate as a sunk cost. It can't. It needs to be a strategic element, especially for field teams, like mobile teams who are doing 5,000 plus miles of business travel per year. You can't ignore those. I mean, you shouldn't ignore any program, but specifically not those ones, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of things with dated fleet policies, there's been a lot of innovation in vehicle maintenance programs and even vehicle technology alone. Like EVs and hybrids are a great option for a lot of folks that need to kind of increase their overall efficiency with their driving. So I think there's a lot of pros to keeping up an up-to-date fleet policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now that you bring up EVs, let's talk a little bit more about that. So EVs obviously getting a lot of attention. They're growing in production, quantity, and they're one option, right? One option being more sustainable. Where do you think EVs make sense today? And where do you think they don't fit from an economic perspective?
Sure. I think EVs are a great option, and I'm a huge advocate for electrification. I drive an EV myself, and I think the driving experience is a lot of fun. So I would recommend, if you haven't had a chance to drive an EV, to get out there and do it. A lot of people struggle with the idea of range anxiety, but I think the OEMs have done a really good job increasing the capability of the vehicles that they build. I think if you take a standard maybe range of 200 miles per day and think, how often are people actually driving more than 200 miles per day? Like that's 50,000 miles annually. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of time on the road. Certainly there's some people that do that, and but for a majority of folks, I think EVs would fit their needs. And so there's a lot of great benefits to EVs, not only from the sustainability side, but also from the total cost of ownership. There's barely any maintenance. The cost to charge it, at least here in the US, is like a third of that to power a vehicle with gas. So I think a really like forward-looking fleet will take into account, how can I apply the benefits of EVs, so the right mix of gas vehicles, and then also some reimbursement solutions to find that optimized mix.
Yeah, it's a good point. The other layer too is like if you're trying to be more sustainable and you're under cost pressure, you can integrate certain EVs into your fleet for those who need vehicles to be company provided. And then you can also layer that on with a reimbursement option that actually incentivizes the use of an EV and gives a really attractive benefit to the people who are actually driving an EV. And I think that's like one of the really creative things about reimbursement is that you don't actually need to own the asset and manage the asset in order to incentivize your people to drive greener, right? Or to be more sustainable.
Exactly. Yes.
Super cool. I want to talk one more time just about some costs. So, sure. And we talked a little bit about one size fits all fleets, and just circling back to that, what hidden costs do companies take on when they stay locked into those one size fits all rigid fleet models, rigid contracts? And where do you see the biggest opportunities for cost savings when implementing a reimbursement program to solve that?
Sure. So I think I'll focus on maybe three different kind of buckets for this one. The first two go together. So insurance being the first one. I think a lot of the larger fleets that operate out there are going to be self-insured, but they oftentimes come with a very large deductible, $1 million or more. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of out-of-pocket expenses when it comes to insuring a fleet. And then the second one there is risk and repair. So repairing vehicles that have been in an accident, and like it's just very costly, and it's not just the cost of the materials and the labor, but it's the downtime costs, right? If that vehicle's out of the fleet, then someone can't do their job, or they're renting a car, right? So there's a lot of costs that go into the risk and repair side as well. And then the third piece here, really fleet vehicles being used for personal use. So the company is paying for that asset 100%, and there's a lot of miles being driven for weekend or leisure type trips. And so I think those are some of their areas. There's a whole laundry list of incremental fees that you may incur by working with fleet management companies, but telematics costs, things like that as well. So those are some of the hidden costs that I've seen over the last couple of years and expect to continue to see going forward.
Yeah, makes total sense. Now, with everything that you've seen across the fleet ecosystem, because Alan, we know you have seen a lot in the fleet world, just for some concluding thoughts, where does reimbursement make sense, and where does it add the most value alongside a traditional fleet?
Sure. So I think some of the biggest opportunities for cost savings and where we see a lot of success is really with the field sales and the service vehicles. A lot of these are rather standard spec vehicles. So that would mean limited upfits. They don't have a bunch of ladder racks and other bins built into the back. They're more base model trims. I think this is where Cardata can come in and provide a solution that's regionally tailored to the cost basis of each employee. It's tax compliant, et cetera. And so when thinking about this on a total cost of ownership perspective, even in my first few weeks here, I've been part of an opportunity where we can save a prospective customer over 50% versus their existing fleet program. And that equates to several $1 million annually. So I think those opportunities out there are ample and would love to continue to work with more and more of those to provide those cost savings and risk savings.
That's amazing. Wow. Those numbers are very hard to ignore.
Exactly. Yeah. Like numbers of that magnitude are particularly impactful in the fleet space when you're typically trying to argue over margins and you're trying to get an extra $500 off a vehicle that costs $40,000. If you can say I can cut my fleet costs in half, like that really moves the needle for an organization.
Yeah, totally. And I don't know any CFO or VP of finance in the world that would say that's not juice that's worth the squeeze. You know what I mean? 50% savings is just, unavoidably attractive for a finance leader.
And we're not compromising their ability to do the job either, right? That's the kicker. I think there's a lot of concern about, well, can they still do the job if they're not driving a vehicle that has our branding on it? Like, not at all, right? This is a completely competitive program there.
Yeah. And the most important thing, as you mentioned, is that people can focus on their job. They have the right enablement. They have the right tools. They have the right asset physically to actually go from point A to point B to point of call and execute what they need to execute without being distracted and without, feeling like they're losing anything. They want to be satisfied. They need to stay focused and they need to feel like their program really supports their needs.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think that's kind of also what touches on the reimbursement as an employee benefit, right? A lot of folks, if you're potentially walking away from a fleet car, you get a chance to pick which car you want to drive, and it's still, you'll get compensated fairly for it, and it meets the needs of your job. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah, totally. Now, as we enter 2026, likely there's going to be more periods of uncertainty. The fleet world is always changing. It's always disrupted. So how do you recommend that companies evolve their fleet strategies during these periods of uncertainty and transition periods?
Yeah. So like you said, I think uncertainty has now become the norm within the fleet world and many other aspects of our economy and world today. But I think by having a resilient program that's really tailored towards your people and still gets the job done, you can shelter your company from a lot of the external risks that we don't have much control over, right? If there's a lot of global supply chain challenges, inflationary pressures, gas prices, for example, that's another big lever. A lot of those things are kind of out of our control, and having a program in place that will be resilient and predictable for the finance leaders and the employees in the field, I think are some great ways to mitigate that uncertainty.
So true. What great advice. Now, in closing, Alan, if listeners walk away with one takeaway about building a smarter, more flexible fleet strategy, what do you hope it is?
Yeah. So when I think about the future of fleet and maybe even more broadly, the future of mobility programs, there is a new way to think about optimization as it relates to costs and risks and the employee experience. So by introducing reimbursement alongside the traditional fleet efforts such as electrification, ownership versus leasing, telematics, et cetera, we can help you build a mobility solution that brings together the best of both worlds without compromising your ability to get the job done. So much of a fleet manager's time is really spent simply ensuring that the folks in the field can get their job done. So kind of to summarize my one final key takeaway, you come to Cardata where we can help you build a comprehensive mobility strategy for your organization that optimizes cost, risk, compliance, and the employee experience in a predictable and resilient way.
Thank you, Alan. What a great summary. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insights. You bring a really unique perspective that I know our customers and prospective customers alike would really benefit from hearing. You really laid out how the world is shifting and how companies can build smarter reimbursements that actually fit the way that people work today. Now, for our listeners, this is only episode 1 of our mini-series, and next time we're going to be diving into how reimbursements actually fit the bigger picture. So stay tuned for that. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for joining us.